Good evening, Philippines. Tonight we're looking into a Supreme Court case that really got people talking. Imagine this. Authorities raid a home, warrant in hand for a rented residence and its premises, and find, well, quite a bit of marijuana.
Okay.
But then the accused says, hold on, I'm just a user. The warrant didn't specifically list the store attached to the house, and there are questions about how the evidence was handled.
Right.
Could a conviction really stand just on his own, kind of contradictory statements, even if maybe the procedures weren't, perfectly followed? That's the heart of this case.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today, the Supreme Court's decision in People of the Philippines versus Sundaram, Magayon, y Francisco. It really brings up some big questions about search warrants, what illegal possession actually means, and how much weight someone's own words carry in court.
And we're basing this discussion primarily on the official source, the Supreme Court First Division's decision itself. That's GR Note 238873 from September 16th, 2020.
That's the one.
Our mission, really, is to unpack the key legal points and understand how the Supreme Court reached its conclusion in this, let's say, debated case. Okay, so let's lay out the facts first. Where and when did this all start?
It started back on August 3, 2004, in Butuan City. There was a buy-bust operation targeting Sundaram Magayon.
Okay, a buy-bust.
And right after that, they executed a search warrant for his place. The warrant specified his rented residence and its premises located on 6th Street, Guingona Subdivision, Barangay 25, Jose P. Rizal, Butuan City.
Rented residence and its premises. So that wording seems important later on. What happened during the operations?
Well, during the buy-bust itself, they allegedly bought a small packet of suspected marijuana from Magayon. Then came the search. And this wasn't just the house. It included an attached store.
Ah, the store. Okay.
And that's where they found quite a lot more. 74 small packets of marijuana, a bag of stalks, and more marijuana in an ice cream container. The total came to, 381.3065 grams.
Wow, okay. That's a significant amount. Were there witnesses to this search?
Yes. Importantly, there were barangay officials,
Right.
Local officials, and also media personnel present.
Right.
They were there, they observed the search, and they signed the inventory list of what was seized.
And Magayon.
He was present too, but he refused to sign the inventory. After the search, he and his girlfriend, though he later said she was just his girlfriend, not his wife, were arrested.
And the substances were confirmed?
Yes. Forensic analysis confirmed it was all marijuana.
Okay, so that leads us to the courts. What happened at the trial court level?
2 separate cases or informations were filed against Magayon. One for violating Section 5 of the Dangerous Drugs Act, RA 9165, that's the illegal sale part from the buy-bust.
Okay.
And the second was for violating Section 11, which is illegal possession of dangerous drugs, based on everything found during the search.
And how did those 2 cases turn out in the trial court?
Interestingly, he was actually acquitted on the illegal sale charge.
Really? Okay.
But for the illegal possession charge, the trial court found him guilty. Guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
So, acquitted of selling, but convicted of possessing. What was the trial court's reasoning for the possession conviction?
They pointed to a few things. The presence of the civilian witnesses during the search that signed inventory. They felt the police followed the rules for the search warrant. And crucially, they introduced this idea of constructive possession.
Right, you mentioned that. What exactly did they mean by constructive possession here?
It means you don't have to be physically holding the drugs. If the drugs are found in a place that's under your control or dominion, you can still be considered in possession.
I see.
So the court said, even if his girlfriend leased or used the store, it was attached to his residence, a place he controlled, so he had constructive possession of what was found there too.
In a sense.
Pretty heavy. 20 years in 1 day, up to 30 years in prison, plus a P500,000 fine.
Okay. So naturally, he appealed this decision. What were his main arguments to the Court of Appeals?
He raised basically 3 key points. First, he argued the search of the store was invalid because the warrant, he claimed, only mentioned the residence, not specifically the store.
Okay, the scope of the warrant.
Second, he argued the prosecution hadn't really proven he owned or controlled the whole premises where the drugs were found. And third, he challenged the chain of custody, how the evidence was handled from seizure to court.
Standard arguments in these types of cases. How did the Court of Appeals rule? Did they agree with him?
No, they didn't. The Court of Appeals affirmed the trial court's decision. They said regarding the search warrant objections, he hadn't raised them during the trial, so he essentially waived his right to object on appeal.
Ah, the waiver point. You have to object early.
Exactly. They also found the warrant's description, rented residence in its premises, was sufficient to include the attached store, and they felt the search itself followed the rules and the chain of custody was okay.
So, conviction upheld. This takes us all the way to the Supreme Court. What were the big questions they had to resolve?
The Supreme Court really focused on two main issues. First, was searching that store actually valid under the warrant?
Right.
And second, looking at everything, was Magayon's guilt for illegal possession proven beyond a reasonable doubt?
Okay, the core issues. So, what did the Supreme Court decide on the search validity?
They upheld the search. They agreed with the Court of Appeals about the waiver objections to the warrant needed to be raised at trial.
Okay.
They also said the description, rented residence and its premises, was sufficient. They noted the officers actually knew the layout because they'd done a test buy earlier. So the term premises reasonably included the attached store in this context. Plus, the search was witnessed, including by Magayon himself, despite some initial claims otherwise.
Interesting. So the search was deemed valid. What about the bigger question was that the conviction for possession itself proven beyond reasonable doubt?
Yes, the Supreme Court affirmed the conviction on that count, too.
They did, and why?
They found all the elements for illegal possession were met. He possessed a prohibited drug. He wasn't authorized to have it, and his possession was, free and conscious.
How did they establish that conscious possession, especially given the arguments about control of the store?
Well, partly through that constructive possession idea, the drugs were found in his residence, which he admitted living in, so he had control. Sharing control with his girlfriend didn't negate his own possession.
Okay.
But, and this seems to have been really crucial, the court pointed to Magayon's own statements, specifically statements he made in counter-affidavits during the investigation stage while he had a lawyer.
Statements he made before the trial, what did he say?
In one affidavit from August 2004, he said, and I'm quoting loosely here, "These marijuana leaves were left at my residence. I was about to report it." And then, even more directly, in a February 2005 affidavit, he stated something like, "The alleged prohibited drugs found in my possession were for my own personal use and not for sale." He even admitted being a user.
Wow. Okay, so those sound like admissions of possession, right? Even if he framed it as personal use.
Exactly. The Supreme Court treated these as extrajudicial admissions. Since they were made voluntarily and with counsel present, they were considered strong evidence against him, binding even.
And did that outweigh the concerns raised about the chain of custody procedures? Because that was one of his appeal points.
It seems it did, for the majority. They cited another case, Regalado v. People, suggesting that such clear admissions of possession can sustain a conviction even if there are, let's say, minor questions about strict compliance with Section 21, the chain of custody rule.
I see. So the admission kind of filled any potential gaps in the procedural chain.
That appears to be the reasoning. The majority felt the testimony from the arresting officer and the forensic chemist adequately established the chain seizure, inventory, marking, lab transfer, court presentation. They acknowledged there was a dissenting opinion, Justice Kageyoa, who really hammered on the chain of custody issues like maybe the marking wasn't immediate and the lack of a DOJ rep at the inventory. The dissent argued Magayon's statements weren't a clear confession to possessing all that marijuana, nearly 400 grams, and that the procedural lapses were too significant. But the majority view prevailed.
Okay, this is a really fascinating case study in how these things play out. When you look back at People v. Magayon, what really stands out to you? What are the big takeaways?
For me, it's definitely the weight given to the accused's own statements versus strict adherence to procedure. It really drives home that point about waiver. You absolutely have to raise objections about searches or evidence admissibility during the trial.
Right, can't save it for later.
Exactly. And the interpretation of premises in a warrant, it can be broader than just the four walls of the house, especially if it includes attached structures known to the officers.
And the power of admissions.
Absolutely. Voluntary admissions, especially made with a lawyer, can be incredibly persuasive, sometimes even overcoming challenges to other aspects of the prosecution's case, like minor chain of custody questions. Constructive possession is also key. Just because you share a space doesn't mean you escape liability if drugs are found there under your general control.
So let's quickly recap some of those key legal doctrines that were really central here.
Sure. First, waiver of rights. If you don't object to the search or evidence admissibility at trial, you generally lose the chance to do so on appeal.
Got it.
Second, particularity of description in search warrants. The description is okay if the officer can reasonably identify the place, Premises can include connected buildings.
Makes sense.
Third, constructive possession. It's about control and dominion over the place where drugs are found, not just physical holding.
Uh-huh.
Fourth, extrajudicial admissions. Voluntary statements made out of court, particularly with counsel, are admissible and can be strong evidence of guilt.
And finally,
Chain of custody. While vital, the court showed that, in some circumstances, particularly with strong admissions, minor imperfections might not be fatal to the prosecution's case, although establishing an unbroken chain is always the goal.
this deep dive into People v. Magayon certainly shows the intricate balance involved. You've got constitutional rights, police procedures, evidence rules, and then the accused's own words thrown into the mix.
It's complex, definitely.
The Supreme Court's decision really highlights how central those admissions became. So, what are your thoughts on this ruling? Do you think his statements were enough to seal the conviction despite the questions raised? We'd love to hear what you think. Drop your comments below. And if you found this breakdown insightful, please hit that favorite button.
Please do.
And of course, if you want more in-depth analyses like this, digging into crucial legal cases and understanding their real-world impact, make sure you subscribe right now to the deep dive. You won't want to miss what we explore next.